Frank Sterling, Local Station Board here at KPFA. And to me, I just feel that this was gone about in the wrong way. I think to myself what would be like if we were locked out of KPFA and what would happen and how I would feel about that. And besides just the feeling of it, of course, there's the legality of it, firing union staff without notice and so on. There is the argument that they say that they can't afford to pay them, but I guess we could have to work that out to see if we could or not. We have been paying them. I think we all know something had to be done at WBAI, but I just feel like this was an underhanded way to go about it, that there could have been a better way to do it. And still, especially in the middle of a fundraising period, there could be funds coming in right now. WBAI is not the only station to run a deficit. KPFA's budget is always over predicted. Listener revenue always seems to be over expected and not to materialize when it matters. We're hanging on, but I believe that this could have been done in a better way. Now we're caught into litigation, more money to spend there, and we should have just, I'm sure the people that planned this had a plan, but to me it doesn't seem like much of a plan at all to eliminate the local programming, the staff. If there was an issue with poor management, maybe we could remove management or replace the management and try to make something better of it. We know that WBAI was locked into the large expense and increasing expense of the transmitter on the Empire State Building. We are now out of that, and we have loans to pay, so we should be focusing on that and improving WBAI, not closing it down.
Yeah, one of the main concerns that I have regard to what's going on there is this lack of democracy. And Pacifica is supposed to represent something different. It's supposed to represent, it has a mission, and the mission is very different than the corporate mission of the rest of the media in the majority of the media of the United States. In fact, Pacifica Network and the news of Pacifica Network, organizations, human rights organizations, social movements, unions, indigenous groups, women's groups, all the different kinds of movements that have existed in this country as well as in other countries of the world have relied on the Pacifica Network to be able to provide information that's crucial for us to know about so that we can act upon it as a human community. And that was what Lewis Hill created. He created a station to be able to relate to each other as human beings. And unfortunately, by taking away our rights as listeners to be able to have listener station boards, that's what actually is they're planning on doing. They are literally saying that there will no longer be any more listener station boards. So one of the questions that I would like to ask this particular listener station board is if they're willing to be completely disbanded by what this new rogue Coup group is doing. What their position is. They would no longer exist. And our rights to be able to vote for them will no longer exist either. If I wanted to listen to NPR, I would listen to NPR. Why have another NPR? We don't need that. And unfortunately, these past few years, the news department at KPFA has been very disappointing. I've been rehashing of NPR. Turn the station, it's the same thing. Instead of a good in-depth analysis, there are still very good programs there. And I am a listener of Your Call Radio, so I have no problem with the fact that Your Call Radio was included into the network affiliate. I love Your Call Radio. Rose Aguilar has a really great program. But that doesn't mean that we should be letting go other programming of really good producers who have been doing work for many, many years. And this whole dichotomy between paid staff and unpaid staff, or unions or not unions, that really doesn't make any difference. In reality, the unions, in particular CWA, of which I am a member as a medical interpreter at UCSF, I'm a member of one of the locals. I'm not speaking as a representative of my local. I am just speaking as a rank and file member. I think the unions in general should be more aware, instead of just standing up for their members, they should look at what's called the Labor Community Alliance, which looks for the improvement of conditions for the entire community, because you improve the conditions for community, you improve the conditions for the workers of that community. Workers belong to families, they belong to communities who are being attacked by this neoliberal model, and now they're attacking Pacifica Network so that we are become disinformed, so we do not seek more in-depth answers to the situations that are going on. Right now in my mother's country, my country, Chile, there's literally insurrection going on because people got fed up because they were raising the prices of the transportation, because people cannot live on the meager pensions that was imposed upon them 40 years ago by the Chicago School of Economics. And because workers are not making enough money, so now they raise the price, and there's this major insurrection going on. And now in Chile, there's a state of emergency. Now, who is going to be really giving a good information regarding that? Can we rely on Pacifica Network if it's going to become an NPR model? We wouldn't be able to rely on Pacifica Network. They won't be able to do that because that's not their mission. The mission of Pacifica is a mission of bringing together humanity, and we need listener votes. We need to keep the listener votes intact. We need to save WBAI. There is no reason we have to be cannibalizing or selling off the dial as if they were not even valid. In fact, they even say that they're not even an entity. In their court papers, they're actually calling WBAI not an entity in and of itself, but just a radio dial. That's what that's how they feel about the workers there. That's how they feel about the workers. They're not even an entity. You know, I'm also I was born in New York City, so I find that completely offensive, as well as the fact that there's been many good programming at WBAI producers, and we need to be able to, fight this, and we need to join together our forces.
I am Daniel Borgstrom. As of this year, I've been on the local station board. I should also mention that I've been attending these board meetings for about 15 years, since 2005. And on, let me just go back a bit and say that on October 7th, well, there came out a bunch of emails, and what we found was that a group of people from, including John Vernile, the interim executive director of Pacifica, had gone to the New York station, our New York sister station, that's WBAI in New York, and taken over the office. They apparently 2 or 3 people went there, accompanied by 2 guards, I understand, and ordered the people out, took over the station. They messed up the studio. I don't know to what degree, other than they took computers. They even took pictures off the walls. And since then, this has gone to court. There have been injunctions, a lot of back and forth, and it's hard to say where at any moment the situation can change. I think there's another hearing coming up Monday. We'll see what happens then. In the meantime, the pretext for all this is that that WBAI is dragging Pacifica into the hole, that Pacifica has to rid itself of WBAI. Well, WBAI has been a problem. I mean, all of these stations have been a problem. KPFA, for the last 2 years, I understand, has gone nearly $500,000 in the hole. I believe the exact number is something like 443,000, something like that. So it's not just WBAI. But anyway, WBAI for many years now has been the usual scapegoat. Not totally undeservedly so, but they have been the scapegoat. And now, let's suppose that what they say that the network could be saved by getting rid of WBAI. Well, okay. consider this. The cost of getting rid of it is going to be greater than the cost of keeping it. The cost of keeping it will include a lot of hassles with the union. Remember John Vernile, the interim executive director, he went and fired or laid off, he said. In effect, he fired the staff without notice. You have to give 30 days notice. He didn't bother with that. Now remember that these people that are doing this claim to be pro-union. They're always making a big fetish of, we are the union people, everybody else. They've actually called us things like called us scabs. They claim to be the union people. But when it comes to what they really want to do, they just throw the union out the door. But the union is there, and whether you like it or not, they are going to it's going to cost a lot of money to deal with that. It's going to cost money to deal with the union. It's going to cost money to keep the transmitter going. It's going to cost money. These upcoming lawsuits are not exactly cheap, and we don't know how long that's going to go on. So my guess, and I think a lot of people share my guess, that this will drive Pacifica could drive Pacifica into bankruptcy. Now, they are denying that they want to take over and they want to sell WBAI. But the cost of this could very likely drive Pacifica into bankruptcy. Remember that they were saying that, or John Vernile and his crew were saying that WBAI did not have money to pay their staff, and that was illegal. Well, according to what they're saying, Pacifica has only about $2,000 in the bank. If that is to be believed, that means that they can't pay it either, and they've just acquired that debt. Also, whatever it is that funds that WBAI would be raising, and they were holding a successful fund drive at this time, and that got interrupted, and reportedly the funds whatever was raised was sent back to the donors. So WBAI is not going to be contributing anything. Yeah, the transmitter rent is $18,000 a month. That's just one of the costs. That's probably the least of the costs. So now, if this goes to bankruptcy, this has been an ongoing thing for several years now. It's been in the air that the network should go bankrupt. Well, if it goes bankrupt, that will throw it into a court, and they can possibly totally rearrange the system. They can put an end to our radio democracy. Now,
Tracy Rosenberg, former Pacifica treasurer for 4 years and executive director of Media Alliance.
So why don't you talk about the financial issues and what happened at this meeting, what was ignored, or the issues that you are concerned about?
Well, the most obvious thing that I saw when a budget was basically handed out, 40 minutes before the board members were supposed to vote on it, if that, was that the basic statements of the actuals from previous years, which is how much money they actually made, were wrong, and wrong by hundreds of thousands of dollars. NETA, which is the accountancy firm that's been hired by Pacifica National, good reputation, even they were talking about how great they are. You're paying them $35,000 a month or $420,000 a year of membership dollars. They put out some preliminary financials. They said KPFA made $3 million last year. And I have to look at a piece of paper that says KPFA made $3.7 million last year with no explanation of any discrepancy. It's crazy.
And the business manager, what was the explanation of that, of the discrepancy between what the presentation was by the business manager here and the NETA report?
Well, she never actually made one. The closest that she came was she said something about not having entered things into a database. But of course, $700,000 is an awful lot of money. And secondly, the database in question is your accounting program. It's called Peachtree, now called Microsoft Dynamics. That hasn't changed. Their membership database may have changed, but you still have to record the income that comes in. I mean,
And they continue to say that they continue to spend money despite the financial decline of income.
Well,
how do you explain that, and what's the future?
well, the current budget looks at spending $3.7 million. It's a deficit budget, by the way. They estimated $3.6 million in income and spending $3.7 million in expenses. And of course, this is an organization that is facing a big loan and has some financial struggles, so you don't want to spend every single dollar that comes in plus a few. But the reality is that KPFA's income has not been at this projected level for better part of 7 years. I mean, it has been in the $3.1 to $3.4 million range for the past 5 to 7 years, except when someone dies and gives them the proceeds of a house, which only happens occasionally. So this idea that they're going to spend $3.7 million is based on nothing. This is a station that lost 8% of its membership last year. It's not in an upward trajectory. This is basically convented stuff. So what it is, by sort of presenting these crazy numbers and gaslighting anyone that actually looks at the financial statements, and just sort of creating a mass delusion that everything is fine, is to set up basically unfettered spending according to management's priorities, and to take the board out of the conversation of deciding how we spend our money, because there are choices to be made. And if you look at the real numbers, then the board can make those choices. If you puff it up with phony numbers, which is what they're doing, then essentially management will decide how the real money, which is something between $3.1 and $3.2 million, will actually be spent.
Do you think there needs to be a cutback in staff because of the declining income?
Well, I'm looking at the staff numbers, and salaries and benefits are now $2.2 million. If NITA is correct, and as stated, they have a good reputation, we're paying them a whole bunch of money, and the income is really $3 million, spending $2.2 million out of $3 million on staff is going to cause the station to topple over, because it doesn't leave enough for the rest of the expenses. If NITA's wrong and the money's a little bit more than that, maybe you'll survive, but it's going to be extremely tight, and it means that KPFA can't invest in new technology. It means that they're going to have trouble paying the interest on the loan. It means that systems and structures are not going to be improved. In other words, if you spend all of the money on one thing, then there's nothing left for anything else.
Do you think they have plans to sell WBAI to pay for the financial crisis?
I think it's distinctly possible. I mean, obviously, there's been language about we're going to put WBAI back on the air again. This is just temporary. But after they walked in and smushed up all the broadcasting equipment, they said to the landlord, find yourself a new tenant. That doesn't sound like a local broadcasting operation that is going to resume. And the reality is that playing reruns from KPFA and KPFK on the New York City signal aren't bringing in any money, and it's not enough to pay for just the transmitter to New York. So the plan that's been put out makes no financial sense, not to mention all the legal bills that are being acquired in order to make this go forward. Yeah. But Pacifica across America is not going to raise money. The New Yorkers have made it clear they want New York-based content, just like we would out in California. So when people do something that doesn't make sense, it's the logical inference that down the line it's going to change into something else.
And the Pacifica board, apparently they're trying to stop it from even meeting. They've lost their majority, the people that want this.
Well, the Pacifica board voted twice, sort of after the fact, on whether they were going to authorize or not authorize what the IED did, the takeover and shutdown of BAI. So on October 12th, they voted. They got 9 votes in favor, 7 votes in opposition, and 5 board members were prevented from voting. And these were people that would have voted no. And if you do the math, that's 9 yes and 12 no. On Sunday, they met again The 9 people who had voted positively boycotted the meeting. The other 12 voted not to authorize the shutdown of BAI and to return to local programming. So a majority of the board has weighed in, has voted. Pacifica is a nonprofit organization. What it comes down to is Pacifica doesn't do anything unless the board authorizes it. So we have a situation where some rogue directors and one rogue employee have taken an action that is unauthorized by the board.
So the shutdown of WBAI should not have happened without a board vote?
Of course not. My God, I've been on I was on the PNB for years. We take votes on issues so much more minor than the shutting down of a station all the time. I mean, this is a serious decision about how to allocate member resources. You have $1.3 million coming in every year from BI members to support that local programming. If you're going to change that, you have to have a serious and sober conversation on the board. And not only did they not have a serious, sober, and extensive conversation over time, they had no conversation.
And that's why they're now trying to prevent the board from meeting?
Well, the logical reason for them to prevent the board from meeting is that the board would once again vote no, right? There are 12 members of the board that do not want to proceed in this fashion. They are a majority of the board. They already voted no, so 1 week later they're going to vote no again. And these folks that think they're authorized to carry out this shutdown don't want that vote on the record.
So they want to prevent the board from meeting?
The only way they can come up with to authorize their action or to claim that it's authorized, or at least that it's not specifically prohibited by Pacifica, is to keep the board from meeting.
Okay.
Virginia Brown, listen. I think some of the people that instituted the action at WBAI, I think some of the people that instituted the action at WBAI that you just read about, probably, I assume they did it with goodwill. I don't assume that everybody that was in on that did do it with goodwill. And if what they wanted to do was save money, I wonder if anybody else has been listening to what's going out over the air on WBAI, because over the hours, which is when people tend to change stations when one show ends and another begins, the music that they play, the film music that they're playing, is obviously generated by machines, and it's extremely repelling. I don't think, I think, I can't imagine that whatever was planned to go on over WBAI was planned to generate money, because what's going on there, and the schedule doesn't always correspond with what's on the air either, so if somebody wanted to know what they were listening to, they wouldn't be able to. It's also, when it does correspond, when I've seen it, it's a West Coast timeline, so it's a New York station. People in New York wouldn't be able to tell what they're listening to. It seems like so I don't really believe. I mean, those are disastrous figures. I've heard other points of view on some of that. For example, why is Pacifica paying a CFO and the other NETA people which are doing the CFO duties? There's not been any answers to that I know of as far. And also, WBAI did contribute a large bequest of over $500,000, I think, within the last few months. So that isn't considered in the statement that you just read. So to me, that statement functions as propaganda. And I'm not saying that Bill Crozier, who wrote it, believes he's putting out propaganda. I don't know. He seemed to me, when I time, like a person of goodwill, but somebody is filling him with propaganda.
Time.
How much time do you have?
2 minutes.
Steve Gilmartin. So first he floated a petition for restructuring Pacifica in order to eliminate any semblance of democratic governance in the middle of an election, because Well, because you don't like democratic governance and want to destabilize it and then get rid of it entirely by having self-selecting boards. But oops, you forgot to make the petition enforceable by following the Pacifica bylaws. So you take the petition to a vote at the national board. But damn it, it's an 11-11 tie there, so you can't push it through this year. But what you can do is break the tie by getting rid of the one KPFA representative on the PNB who opposes it. After all, he voiced an opinion in an email against the petition. Can you believe it? Someone speaking up and explaining why he's against what you want. So his removal will presumably break the tie in the PNB. But meanwhile, you just can't wait because WBAI is bringing down the network. Well, this is classic scapegoating. All of the stations have been doing poorly financially. In fact, BAI is the only station that's gained listeners in the last year. And the worst financial decisions so often blamed on BAI, the horrible contracts with Democracy Now! And the Empire State Realty Trust, were actually the doing of Pacifica National, which, like KPFA itself, has been profligate at a time when belt tightening was desperately needed. It's hard for me to avoid the conclusion that the brutal smash and grab of WBAI, during their fund drive no less, is designed to destroy the station and use the proceeds from BAI's choice position on the dial to transform the network into a sleek national broadcast machine pushing Democratic Party, national security state propaganda just in time for the national election in 2020.
Thank you. Greg Allen Getty.
Excuse me, you're not allowed to sit at the table. Could you please stand?
Great.
Sorry, just for protocol.
So the financial situation was outlined in the Black Agenda Report article, Solidarity Never, about the WBAI being the only one with an uptick. And if you're applying the same standards, KPFA, this station has had the same problem in half the last 10 years. So if it's not financial, what is it? If we look back 20 years, of course, every 20 years, you notice we take a right-wing turn, and you got to get rid of the media to do that. It was pretty obvious, the corporate raiders. And the exact same thing is happening now, coming from Pacifica. But the situation last time had the IPSA, I don't know, Intelligence Professional Security Association or something, but they were out openly touting their CIA, FBI. Now, if anybody thinks about the word Pacifica, the cloak and dagger business is who this station hires. Well, now you're piping in the middle of a fund drive. You're going to throw away $1 million down the toilet on this pretext that it's a financial situation. No, it's because they're still broadcasting guns and butter at WBAI. That's where you got to go to listen to it, unless you're going to, and that's the only show, really, that covers the inside job that yields all these wars. So the Jim Crow coup required the shutting down of this station, just like the 2020 coup. It'll be the fourth Jim Crow coup, counting 2 Bush coups, a Trump coup, and then whatever is going to be coming up. You can't have a network called Pacifica, and you can't have the majority, it's about half black in Washington and, 40% in New York.
Thank you very
got
much.
White people in San Francisco, LA, and Texas shutting down the black voice. It's racist as hell.
Your time is up. Thank you. Next person.
Sula? I'm Sula Culver, and I just have a couple things to say. It looks bad to me, what's happening right now. It reminds me of 1999, And aside from that, the talk about ending the local station boards, that's kind of appalling. And it seems like it's a push to turn KPFA and the other stations into an NPR kind of a network. And I'm also unhappy about the no videotaping of meetings for really stupid reasons. That's it.
Thank you. Next person.
Okay, you tell me I'm next. I'm next. Okay, we'll talk in a second about the chair's misstatements, but I just wanted to share with you an email dated October 17th. It is from a member of the National Board, and it says, at this point, we have discussed what's going on. At this point, John Vernile feels that the best course is to go forward with getting WBAI local programming back. However, in regard to how much local control programmers would have, after pre-recording, all shows would be reviewed. And the email goes on to suggest to, I believe, Mr. Voorhees, that if he votes to support this compromise plan, there will be no reason for Donald Goldmacker to remove him. So the question here is, I've heard all of your stuff about the great financial drain of WBAI. How does pre-recording content and reviewing it prior to airing it solve your financial problems? In other words, what on earth are you all talking about? In terms of what Ms. I'm saying this is what your national board is saying, that your ED is saying. In terms of what Ms. Huggins said, on October 12th, 9 board members, which is not a majority, it's 22 people on the board, voted to support that long thing that is inaccurate on about 27 different counts. But on October 13th, 12 members of the board, which is a majority of the national board, voted both to rescind it, to restore local programming on BAI immediately, to change the officers of the board, and to discharge the law firm Foster Garvey, or Garvey Foster, I think it's Foster Garvey, which, with your $2,000 in the bank, you have now run up at least $50,000 in legal bills that you cannot afford in order to keep local programming off of BAI before you can censor it.
Thank you, your time is up.
So let's be clear.
Thank you, your time is up. You are out of order.
Censorship does not solve financial problems.
No, you do not get to continue.
Oh my gosh.
You know what?
Tracy said,
Stop.
Okay, we'll end the meeting if you want to.
I know it's scary.
I'm going to let the board, our board members make some statements after this to respond so they can clarify some things. Do we have any other comments to be made? Yes, Anthony.
There's a list.
Or did you sign up?
If people cannot follow the rules,
We will end the meeting.
She finished a sentence. Give it a
No, she would not stop talking. She grabbed the mic back. She didn't just finish a sentence.
Somebody should be
Let's move forward.
Anthony.
Yeah, I'm Anthony Fest. I've been associated with KPFA for 25 years, including about 20 years of Sunday newscasts and 3 terms on this board. I never did like these so-called group agreements. They always struck me as putting lipstick on a pig. And nothing is stronger evidence for that than this vile motion to remove Tom Voorhees from the national board. It's preposterous. It's like you cannot express a dissenting opinion if you're part of the KPFA delegation to the national board. What is this radio station and this radio network if not a home for dissenting opinions? For speaking out against wars and drone attacks and welfare reform and all the other nasty things, regardless of whether a Republican or a Democrat sits in the White House. So I urge you to, and also, not only was Tom offense apparently expressing a dissenting opinion, but his The thing that's even more offensive about this is the disparity in radio knowledge between Tom and whoever is going to be put in his place, or whoever sits in our PNB delegation now. This is the Tom Voorhees who's been working on community radio for, as I understand it, most of his adult life, who got an award from the NFCB a few years ago, who is even now working to improve KPFA's transmitter in the Monterey Bay area. I couldn't do those things. Probably none other of you could do those things. So enough of this opinion cleansing, and if this truly is a place for independent thinking, you board members need to stop and think and reject this shameful thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Lisa Milos, I'm a listener, and I'm Chilean American, and I remember a Pacifica and I remember a KPFA which used to stand for something. I remember, and today, by the way, today there's an insurrection going on in Chile and there's a state of emergency and the military is going to be out in the streets, and we have somebody from the news department, Brian Edwards Tigert, which basically sounds like NPR. And I'm very furious. I'm furious that you guys are voting in favor of taking my vote away and disbanding yourselves. You will no longer exist under the new proposal that they're trying to impose upon us. Local station boards will no longer exist. That is completely anti-democratic. The whole process is anti-democratic. You're cannibalizing the listeners, the thousands of listeners of New York City, my hometown, by the way.
Mine too.
And this is completely disgusting of your behavior. You cannot claim to be leftists, you cannot claim to be progressives at all. Just ask yourself this one question. If 40 years ago the Democratic Party would have been in charge of Pacifica Network, do you think that Pacifica Archives would be full of the incredibly rich, incredibly reporting that it has that it has as its history? Do you think it would be even the small minute thing that it has today as its history? The Democratic Party is destroying this station. I'm also a CWA member. I'm not a member of the particular local, but I'm a member of UPTI CWA. I'm speaking as a rank and file member, and I find this completely disgusting. The union busting that is going on by hiring a union busting lawyer firm as well is also disgusting. And I don't care if some staff members who are also CWA members might agree with management in this case. I don't care about that. That's not the point. This is a labor community alliance.
Just one quick comment. Is it a mistake to assume that everybody on the board was involved in any kind of bylaws change? Being changed? I'm not sure. You're not the chair. Just to let
You
us know.
allow me to talk back to you, then I will accept you talking back to me. I would be happy to have a conversation. You want to have a conversation, we can have a conversation. You want a conversation, we can have a conversation.
Mara Rivera.
Let's have a conversation. You want to have a conversation, then let's have one.
Mara Rivera is next.
Yeah, I'd like to cede my 2 minutes to Tracy Rosenberg.
Here, Mel.
No, Tracy's already. No, we don't do repeats. We don't
Why
do
not?
time.
That's not
If
our
she has
rule.
more to say.
Procedure.
That's great. You can, when you're chair of the board, you can do it.
The illegal destruction of radio WBAI was planned long ago. It was preceded by many years of carefully cultivating myths about the station and its network, especially these two. One, that it was so financially out of balance that it was dragging down an entire network of stations, which we would be better without. Myth two was that the network could not democratically govern itself because the members were caught up in squabbling instead of governance. In regard to myth one, WBAI had used the major part of the bequest, it received to completely repay at least 3 past years of central services. Most importantly, listenership was at WBAI was the only one of the 5 stations in an upswing, meaning more stable finances. KPFA, for example, still has been losing listeners. It lost a big chunk of them as a result, possibly, of the sudden and unexplained discontinuance of 4 different radical programs. And it was coming up short on its budgets to the tune of $43,000 from the last financial report. As to myth 2, democracy has not had a fair hearing at Pacifica. There has been obstruction, particularly at KPFA, probably at other stations as well, of problem solving at KPFA. I believe it was because what has been the majority doesn't believe that the LSB has a role in governance, aside from fundraising maybe. And just one more sentence or two.
Give her 1 second. Go ahead.
We have other people.
Rich. Okay. These are your allies, Mom. These are your new allies.
Yeah. I'm Richard Stone, someone who's temporary, I guess you'd call myself somewhere in the grade zone in limbo. I served on the Community Advisory Board for 3 years, and basically, my out of order, point of information I wanted to make, just prior to the beginning of the meeting was to, ask, about the, just clarifying points on, if people in the audience could make, agenda change, request that, maybe even immediately at the behest of, any of the, say, LSB members. But since we're past at this point, I'm only respectfully requesting, at this point, that during the Community Advisory Board meetings, because I have to go through the process of being reinstated through this member board right here, and I respectfully request that during the Community Advisory Board meeting minute session that perhaps that we could allow that reinstatement to occur. And also just a quick another clarifying question about when this is dating back sometimes, so there's probably a lot that's been resolved since then. But when the Supreme Court of New York actually suspended, I mean when they reinstated what they saw in their purview as the illegal suspension of WBAI's activity, was there any provisions in that law that would allow the station in any way to float financially until, say, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting money could possibly come through and probably that, or maybe some other form of revenue help reinstate WBAI outside of the fundraising services. Okay, thank you.
I'm going to be allowing the board members to answer some of the questions that have been brought up.
No, the only thing that is in order is the presentation.
You're out of order.
Next one would be.
You need to follow your agenda, Chris.
You're not answering that
It's not
question.
permitted.
Mary Ann.
What is the question?
My question was about, is there any? I'll try to be brief as possible. Did the Supreme Court ruling have any stipulations that would allow to WBAI to temporarily be reprieved from any financial severe obligations, provided that they were making a good nature measure towards? Okay.
No, I don't know who it is. It's recording.
Marianne, is this on?
Yes,
on?
very
on?
good. Yes.
I can project without this, you know that. I'm Marianne Thomas. I am a listener, and I'm standing here now as a listener. I'm on the agenda for the CAB report. I'm a member of the Community Advisory Board. With the way often these meetings go, I have to leave so I may not actually be able to report about the CAB. So in a sense, I'm here to kind of say what's important to me in terms of the cab, which in a sense relates to all of the discussion that's gone on today about WBAI, etc., because the plan is to eventually make the cabs the most important exterior entity rather than the LSBs. And currently the cab is down to 4 members, one of which I've never met. He's apparently been approved by you guys. I thought I came to most of these meetings and didn't hear when 2 new members got approved, but I want to support Rich in his efforts to get reappointed to the cab. We honestly need a strong cab along with a strong LSB. I am privy, I guess, to both sides of this argument, and I have to say, I just want to stay on the cab and try and help KPFA, because this whole thing is horrid. And so if you could please reinstate Rich. My term ends in December, as does Craig. Craig's term ends in December, and if I don't re-up and Craig doesn't re-up because he's on the LSB, we would have 2 members of the cab. Thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me finish my sentence.
This restrictive protocol is like outrageous. I've been to city councils and different places, and people are a little more fluid about what's going on, which reflects to me a tone and a tenor and an attitude that is despicable. It seems to me and others that it is a kind of coup to say that it's a financial situation that's going on. Financial is the dirty word that put Trump in power, that has people out on the streets, live beings, that has a major weapons industry. This is all real. This isn't just bibble babble, that they want to throw weapons all over on live beings, and now we have a climate that's tossing us over the edge into from a wildfire to melting ice. We need to talk about this, we need to put it forward, and we need to protect the freedoms we have instead of creating a more expanded oppression of a prison system, which is a violation of the dignity of any living being. It's despicable, and we can't go on exclusionary to people, sticking them in corners, throwing them out of homes, failing to recognize the conditions people live in. We need to be inclusive, supportive, and make things work. Let's cut the prison system. Let's cut the horrible weapons that are the manufacturing delight of the military. Let's get it together and get the funds we need, or the support, or a way. Because if we don't stand up now and stick together and speak together and let that voice be heard and connect, where are we going? How much lower can we get and still breathe? I can't breathe is what I want to say now. I can't breathe if you cut my head off or you cut off BAI.
I have one question, and maybe somebody can answer on the next agenda. Is on the budget. My question is, who has oversight on KPFA budget? I thought it was LSB and LSB members, but apparently LSB members cannot even get the budget on how much paid for the management, how much paid for the staff, as a salary. And so I like to find out who has oversight to check into the KPFA budget. Thanks.